3 days ago, I was supposed to go on my honeymoon with my husband, but he invited his cousin to join us without telling me. Well, he isn't actually his brother, but his cousin, which still felt odd. As a result, I chose not to go at all. I left him at the airport, and now his family is upset. My husband, Joey, 27, and I, 27, met through friends, and after almost 4 years of dating, we got married a couple of weeks ago. We had planned a honeymoon to Italy, but everything fell apart for reasons I'll explain. What upset me the most was that he didn't even think it was important to ask for my opinion before making such a huge decision. He just went ahead and booked flights for his cousin Pete, 28, without even checking with me first. The timing couldn't have been worse. He told me this 30 minutes before our flight was supposed to leave. He casually mentioned that we would get 2 days alone before Pete would join us, as if this had been part of our previous discussions. When I asked him to clarify, he admitted he hadn't mentioned it earlier because he didn't want me to freak out, like I was doing at that moment. He had invited Pete to join us on our honeymoon because Pete had been going through a tough time after his wife Julia had told him she wanted a divorce. Apparently, our wedding made Julia realize that she wasn't happy in her marriage and had fallen for someone else. She didn't name anyone, but she told Pete that she couldn't continue deceiving him. She needed space. Pete had been very depressed ever since, and Joey thought it would help him to come with us on the honeymoon. I was furious and told Joey this wasn't acceptable. I said that if Pete was coming, it would ruin the whole point of our honeymoon, and I demanded that Joey cancel the plans. Instead of agreeing, he argued that I was being heartless, reminding me that Pete had been married for 3 years to Julia, his high school sweetheart. Now, she no longer loved him. Joey felt it was our moral duty as family to support him. He argued that we would still have 2 days alone, and that should be enough for me. I couldn't handle it anymore. I grabbed my things, told him I didn't want to go on the honeymoon, and that he should go with Pete. I left the airport immediately, while Joey tried to follow me, but I rushed into a cab and went to my parents' house. Since then, I've been staying with them, feeling hurt and confused. We've been together for 4 years, and while we've had our fair share of arguments, nothing ever felt like this. Joey went ahead with the trip anyway, which made me even more upset. After I left, he kept texting me, asking me to come back. He explained that he couldn't cancel because everything had already been paid for, and some of it was non-refundable. He said that he didn't want to lose the deposit. So he had to go on the trip, but he kept urging me to rethink my decision and return to him. He promised we could have a second honeymoon later, just the two of us, but I was too hurt by his last-minute decision to trust him again. What really hurt was that he had kept this secret until the last possible moment, and I felt manipulated. Trust and honesty are non-negotiable for me in a relationship, and after what he did, I don't think I can trust him anymore. I messaged him last night, telling him I wanted a divorce or annulment, whatever it took to end this. I was deeply disappointed, but I felt like there was no other way. He responded, saying I was overreacting and that we could talk about it when he got back. That just made things worse. I couldn't understand why he thought I should just forgive him and move on. I told him that I was done, no matter what he thought. I was going to wait for him to come back since I couldn't end the marriage without his consent, but I planned to consult with my lawyer in the meantime. I blocked him, so I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. I needed space to process everything, but it seems his family can't accept my decision. This morning, I got several messages from them, saying that I was overreacting and that I should give him a chance to make things right. They agreed his actions weren't right, but they think I'm being too harsh by ending the marriage. Of course, they're going to side with their son. We've had a good relationship in the past, and I thought they would see that what Joey did was wrong. Instead, they think I should give him a chance to explain when he comes back. My parents, on the other hand, told me to do whatever I felt was best. They're staying neutral, but support me no matter what. I've talked to a few friends, and they're divided on the matter. Some think I should wait for him to return, talk it through, and see where things go. Others believe I should file for an annulment immediately since his actions were unacceptable. Now, I'm left questioning my next steps. As for Joey's relationship with Pete, they've been best friends since childhood, but I still don't think that's an excuse for Joey to invite him on our honeymoon without discussing it with me first. I had no idea Pete was going through a divorce. None of us did until all of this came to light. Julia filed for divorce after we got married, and the proceedings will start when Pete returns from the trip. As for Julia and me, we're not close. We've met a few times at family gatherings, but I don't plan on discussing this with her. Regarding who Pete is in love with, I don't know. Joey didn't share any details, and Julia never mentioned who it was, so I have no information on that front. But if I find out anything more, I'll update everyone. Financially, I'm not too worried. Joey and I have kept separate finances, so splitting assets shouldn't be an issue. We don't have much in joint property, so it should be a straightforward process, but right now, I'm focused on trying to move on with my life. I haven't figured out my next steps yet, but I'm doing my best to stay busy and not dwell on everything happening around me. It's tough, but I'm trying to stay strong. I was busy with work at the time, so I didn't feel like responding immediately. However, when I received that message, I was so upset that I couldn't hold back. I replied and told him that we couldn't have a conversation because the opportunity had passed. He had chosen not to reach out to me for the past week, even though he had made a huge mistake and hurt my feelings. I was no longer interested in talking to him, and there was nothing left to discuss. I also mentioned that I had already consulted with my lawyer, and now that he was back, we could proceed with the process of ending the marriage. For a few moments, he didn't respond, but then he apologized, saying he was truly sorry for not getting in touch sooner. Apparently, he had been trying to support Pete, and he understood that I was upset. He mentioned there were things I didn't know yet, and factors he had to consider. If I just listened to him, he could explain why he had done everything. I'll admit, this piqued my interest, because if there were reasons behind his actions, I wanted to know them. Even though I couldn't fathom what kind of explanation could possibly justify this, I still wanted to hear him out. After thinking about it for a while, I told him to come over to my parents' house that evening, and we could discuss everything. I didn't think I'd reconcile with him under any circumstances, but at least I'd get some answers. I deserved that much. Plus, my lawyer had already delivered the paperwork for the annulment, so even if his explanation wasn't satisfactory, I could have him sign the documents and we could move forward. Eventually, we were going to have to meet in person, and I couldn't avoid him forever. I just wanted to get this over with quickly. Hopefully, he'd have a good enough reason for his actions, because if not, it would only complicate things further and leave me feeling even more devastated. Anyway, he's coming over in a couple of hours, so I'm mentally preparing for what's to come. Joey arrived as planned and left about an hour ago. I'm still processing everything he said. When he showed up, he seemed really uncomfortable and started by apologizing. He acknowledged that what he did was terrible and that he had broken my trust. He was aware that repairing it might be nearly impossible, so he wasn't going to beg me to come back or try to fix things. Honestly, I was taken aback, as I expected him to at least try to make things right, especially since it seemed like he was going to do that at first. But instead, he expressed understanding about why I didn't want to stay married anymore. This conversation was turning out to be different from what I expected. After apologizing, he explained that Pete had always been like a brother to him, and that they'd grown up together. He knew that Pete was going through a tough divorce, and that Julia was in love with someone else. He felt bad for Pete, which was why he invited him to come along on our honeymoon. But there was more to the story. The real reason he invited Pete wasn't just because he felt sorry for him. It was because Julia was actually in love with Joey. When he said that, I thought he was joking, and I honestly didn't know how to react for a few minutes. Then I asked him how he found out, and when he discovered the truth. He told me Julia confessed to him the night before our wedding. He even unlocked his phone and showed me the text message she sent him. I could hardly believe my eyes. Over the years, I had always noticed how close Joey and Julia were, but I never imagined that she could be in love with him. I always thought they were just friends. But this was different. I asked him why he hadn't told me about it, because it seemed important, especially since I should have known that someone in the family had confessed their love for him just before our wedding. Joey explained that he didn't want to cause any drama the night before our wedding, so he kept it to himself. I found that reason weak and told him that keeping this from me was a mistake. Once again, he didn't argue but admitted that he hadn't been thinking clearly. He just wanted to avoid drama at all costs, so he stayed quiet. After the wedding ceremony, he spoke to Julia privately during the reception and confronted her about her feelings. When she confirmed what she'd said in the text, he told her she had to leave Pete because if she didn't love him, she was wasting his time. They argued because Julia didn't want to tell Pete the truth. She believed that since Joey was committed to me, even though she loved him, telling Pete the truth would be pointless. Joey insisted that she had to be honest with him and leave him if she didn't love him. Apparently, Joey had played a significant role in Pete's divorce. Out of guilt, he invited me to join him on our honeymoon so Pete wouldn't be alone and would feel better, but it didn't work out the way he expected. I asked him why he hadn't been honest with me from the start, because all the issues in our marriage were caused by a lack of transparency. He didn't have an answer for that. He simply said that he thought it would cause more conflict, and he wasn't good at handling that kind of situation. After explaining everything, Joey told me that if I still wanted to proceed with the annulment, I could. He just wanted me to know the truth. I told him that getting the annulment wasn't something I was looking forward to, but it had become necessary. It was clear that he still couldn't be fully honest with me, and that wasn't going to work in a marriage. I appreciated that he came clean, but it was too little, too late. He had been so focused on not leaving Pete alone that he took me for granted and left me alone in the process. I then told him how miserable I had been the past few days, and he hadn't even bothered to check on me. That was what hurt the most. He tried to explain himself, saying that he was just trying to support Pete, but I told him that it didn't matter. He had made promises to me when we started dating, and those promises had faded. When we got married, he vowed to always be there for me and to show me how much he loved me. But since then, I didn't feel loved or supported. I told him that if I were in his position, the first thing I would have done was tell my fiancée, someone I loved, about the situation, and we would have faced it together. He had no reply, and he admitted that he had messed up. He then asked me if I still loved him. After thinking it over, I told him that I did, but love wasn't enough to make this work anymore. At this point, love wasn't enough to keep us together. I told him that what mattered now was that we both needed time to heal, and that meant going our separate ways. He nodded, and as I saw tears in his eyes, I felt bad, but I knew there was no other option. So, despite feeling devastated, the two of us completed the paperwork, and in a few days, we'll finalize the annulment. I'm still processing everything I learned tonight, and moving on won't be easy, but I have to try. Before he left, we had one last hug, and I almost broke down. But I stayed strong, and I know that's what I'll need to do until I'm able to fully move on. Hey, it's been nearly a year since I ended things with Joey. We got the annulment finalized a few weeks after we spoke, and I moved into my own apartment shortly afterward. It was tough adjusting to living alone after being with Joey for so long, but I had to get used to it. For the first few months after the breakup, we avoided each other and didn't speak. But about 4 months ago, we ran into each other at a wedding. One of our mutual friends was getting married, and we were both invited. When we saw each other, we were civil, though it wasn't like how it used to be. Honestly, I'm relieved about that. I thought it would be really difficult to see him again, but it wasn't as bad as I expected. We're back on speaking terms now, but we're just friends. I found out that while Pete was going through his divorce, Joey told him the truth about why it was happening, that Julia was in love with him. After Pete found out, he cut Joey off, and they no longer speak. Joey also told me that the honeymoon didn't help Pete, like he had hoped. We joked that it might have been better if we'd gone on the honeymoon ourselves, and maybe that would have saved our marriage. We spent some time reminiscing about the past, hanging out with friends, and having fun. He mentioned that he had moved out of our old house a couple of months after I did because, without me, he couldn't afford the rent alone. He also told me that he had quit his job